Benjamin Castle are Americans. Watching the footy.
Liam Ryan saying, kick it my way, I want to jump over the pack, and here he comes! Ryan!
This is Buddy Franklin! This is the greatest showman!
Got the handball off to Myers. Myers looking for the lead of Stengel. Gee, they're good. Gee, they're sharp. Razzle dazzle Rioli.
Oh, who else? McDonald!
No,
around the body. Jazz up!
He's off from inside the centre square. Boys kick the goal. Boys kick the goal from inside the centre. Fuck! I can't believe it.
Good time of day, everyone. Welcome to episode 233 of Americans Watching the Footy, where we are recapping, using it for the first time this episode,
Gather round,
also known as Round 5, but more importantly,
gather round.
yeah, this is how it's going to be. I am Benjamin Castle, coming to you from South San Francisco, California, which means I am next to my brother Ethan and our executive producer, his son, Brian Harambe.
Yeah, hi everybody.
Hi, Dr. Ethan.
We're here. Here, high five, proven sus. To prove that we're actually doing this, that's here. We're gonna differentiate the sound of a high five to the sound of me clapping.
And the sound of me clapping. Was home for the start of Passover, Chag Sameach, and I'll be flying back before you hear this. But in terms of clapping, one of us had a lot more reason to do that this weekend because Adelaide 15-10-100 defeated by Geelong 18-11.
119.
I don't care that it was against Adelaide rather than Port. There's satisfaction in scoring 119 in South Australia regardless.
I literally had not thought of that until now. That's how much of a whirlwind this whole game was and everything that happened with it. Pros got up by 30 and then everyone decided, hey, Tom Atkins is playing really hard. We should be more like him.
He's the most non-captain captain in the game right now, and that is a compliment.
He set the tone and everybody else followed. Not making a bunch of stupid turnovers also really helped because that was an issue early. That was one of the reasons the Crows had gotten up comfortably. Also, just Darcy Fogarty taking 4 goals in rapid succession in the second quarter.
Not as fast as Murphy Reed had done against the Cats, but maybe a little similarity there. I believe both of us at different points called the Cats kicking brain dead in the first half. Just so much trouble for no clear reason exiting the defensive half.
Yeah, and from guys you wouldn't expect, like Ollie Dempsey. But Dempsey redeemed himself. Pretty much everyone stepped up in the second half. If you had to pick a negative for Geelong, I mean, I guess Tyson Stengel was pretty quiet. He hasn't had a great season so far, honestly. This was the first really good win over not just a good team, but a team that was in form.
Crazy to me the way this game started that Geelong ended up with 13 of the final 18 goals, and 4 goals in this game came from Patrick Dangerfield. His first 4-goal game since, believe it or not, a 2020 game, the semi-final that year against Collingwood. And this is his first stretch of 3 straight multi-goal games since 2017. So the way that they've repurposed him is working quite well. And part of that is because you've still got the players there in the engine room to apply the pressure. Atkins is a big one there. Bailey Smith, he's getting on more and more overlaps. Still, not the most efficient kicker, but did more than enough in this game.
He was good chaotic in this game, I would say. Kind of that second midfielder behind Atkins in terms of really leading the charge there. The biggest thing was just getting on top in the middle because you kind of just have to accept that the Crows are going to be one of the more efficient teams when they get into the forward 50. And that was the case up until really the fourth quarter when they got held to just a single goal. And that was a lot of good work by Sam DeConing. There was one in particular where he recovered after getting way out of position to prevent a Zach Taylor kick intended for Darcy Fogarty. I think that was the one because I included it in the notes, which tells you something.
I made a checklist at halftime as to what Geelong could do to get back into this game.
Was it just stop the dumb turnovers and get on top of them in the midfield? Because That's what I had it as.
Continuing to take advantage of center bounce success was part of that. They did have 4 goals from center bounce in the first half, including the last one before the break from Jeremy Cameron. They also started the second half with another center bounce goal, so that was fine. I noted Atkins' pressure rubbing off on teammates, and that includes actually sticking tackles, because that's a recurring problem with Geelong, and they managed to fix that in the second half a bit.
John Manna in particular, bad first half tackling, much better second half.
Manna was the one that I had noted.
Ollie Dempsey's had some issues with it too. Lawson Humphreys, that's an area where he needs to get better. Tyson Stengel as well. That's something that I think a lot of people noticed is as good as he is at ground level, he doesn't really go after contests much physically, which, I mean, it's nice that he doesn't get hurt much. Like, you're not worried about him, like, dislocating his shoulder. But, yeah, once in a while, I'd just like to see him go stick a tackle. There were only a couple of, like, negative physical moments in the second half. Like, Jack Bowes letting, I think it was Isaac Rankin, just back out of a tackle. But Pros ended up missing out of that.
I noted Bowes just being one of the better creators through chaos in this game, and he's stepped up these past couple weeks. But the other one that I noted was just continued clean work from Brad Close in tight quarters. We talk about Close being one of the best players in terms of impact per touch in Geelong's lineup, if not the entire league. And yeah, he showed that side of him again. Like, who else do we have in terms of like that per touch impact? Like, not a crazy goal scorer, because people would say Sam Darcy otherwise, like Bo McCreary, I guess, in a different sort of way.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Close with 2 goals and 2 assists from 14 and 7 contested possessions in there. I think his rating from Champion Data was in the 20s, even though he only had 14.
But yeah, my thing with the Crows, their midfield sometimes is good. In this game, it wasn't spectacular. Although I do give a lot of credit to Isaac Rankin, who is like as much of a game time decision as it gets. And he came right in and looked like he hadn't missed a beat. Like, there was no calf concern at all.
Checking the thing with Close, third highest rated player, 21.7.
Interesting that Mark Keane was second highest, because he had some good moments and launched a couple of scores from the back.
Rebounds, I think, are rated pretty highly.
But also had a couple of pretty bad one-on-one moments.
Yeah, I noted some of his one-on-one issues. Again, that's a week-over-week thing, and where, you know, getting back Nick Murray would definitely improve things for the Crows. You know, you had your concerns. Everybody had their concerns defensively for Geelong in this game, matching up against those Talls, despite not having Tom Stewart and Jack Henry. Even though Fogarty got 4, Walker 2, and Phil Thorpe 1, you'd still kind of have to be satisfied.
Yeah, I honestly can't find myself complaining much about that. But between the absence of Murray and poor games from Josh Worrell and Max Michaelaney, like, Adelaide is not in a position where they could afford that right now. And both of them had their trouble, whether it was with Cameron, Dangerfield, etc.
Inconsistency, I'll say. But, you know, we also had in defense this game from Adelaide, unhinged.
Yeah, I've said, and if you don't pay enough attention to non-Victorian teams, maybe this has been lost on you, that Mitch Hinge can kind of like frostball it. And he frostballed this one really hard. Apparently, you can just kick it through your own goal without it being called insufficient intent.
I think maybe it was ruled that he was under enough pressure from Max Holmes, but hey,
it was a shit call, and there were a lot of shit calls in this game, about 75 to 80% of which favored the Crows. But of course, you know, they've got to focus in on like one mark that was paid that was kind of 50-50 that didn't even lead to a goal.
I would assume that Mitch Hinge is our easy winner for own goal of the year, even though it's not really a goal, it only counts as a behind. Then right after that, Jeremy Cameron smothered his kick in, and Billy Smith ended up getting the goal from that. Off the next center bounce, Hinge got pinged for insufficient intent. It was like in the span of 2 or 3 minutes, these 3 total unhinged plays, and that's the term we're going to keep using.
It was pretty fun.
He did fight back, I'll say. He set up the last goal of the third quarter. He still has a lot of ability as a rebounding defender, but he also has that side of him. It's not quite Jekyll and Hyde, because you know it's always there. Like,
there's a fun, chaotic predictability to it.
Chaotic good. Definitely chaotic good from Mitch Hinge.
Reece Stanley this was a good game as a whole for players I used to talk a lot of shit about. Reece Stanley outdid Riley O'Brien. That seemed like a pretty universal consensus despite the Crows having a very heavy edge in hitouts.
Crows ended up plus 21 in hitouts, but that didn't matter. And, with Blitzovs in, he did more or less stay back. Geelong were trying to keep Blitzovs as the extra man in defense to mixed results, but Stanley did the job again.
And then Jack Bowes.
Yeah, I mentioned him already again. There was plenty of chaos, and he managed to be clean enough to create, even when that chaos was forced by his teammates, including Baslenka.
Rudy Edsall said this was probably like the third best home and away win of the last 5 years, putting it only behind the awesome Jack Henry winner against Richmond and I don't remember which other. He had it ahead of the after the siren Gary Rowan win against the Dogs.
That's a take.
Aha, at Port 2022 was the one that he had second.
That was only like the fourth best game of that 2022 round 19. Is that the best round of footy that we have seen thus far?
I think so. And then I would still give a mention to, there are a couple that didn't make this cut that I remember fondly. A win over the Dogs at Marvel where Stewart got concussed and Brian ended up playing halfback. That was pretty good. Oh yeah, Tom Stewart missed this game. He had the shits.
Yeah, I mentioned no Stewart, no Jack Henry. And yet, in the game where you were the most worried about things defensively, the Cats won.
And yes, they gave up 100, but again, there was that one run from Fogarty, and it was more just the midfield needing to get his shit together. And once the midfield got it going, everything else kind of flowed. And I'm not willing to go tons of alarms on the Pros yet, but I will say this. They are really, really reliant on their forwards being good because it's a vulnerable midfield. And defensively, especially considering what they're missing right now, there are some serious gaps there. And if this team, I don't see this as a team that right now has the ability to kind of get on top of things when it's not all rolling their way. I guess if they're not firing on all cylinders, I don't see them winning a game against a really good team if they're not playing their absolute best.
And who do they have next week?
GWS?
Saturday afternoon home game against the Giants before visiting Freo for Anzac night. Oh yeah, and they're going to be without one of their former Giants for next game because James Peatling was suspended.
Yep, one game for a sling tackle. Correct call. This is a really tough stretch for them. The 3 games after those Kelpie you mentioned, home against the Blues. We'll see if that becomes tough for what's going on with Carlton.
Then away showdown.
And then at Collingwood.
Speaking of Collingwood, they have now won their past 10 games at Adelaide Oval. Collingwood 16-13-109, defeating the Sydney Swans 12-6-78. Still a very good clash despite missing out on the more red look from Sydney.
I feel better about this knowing that it wasn't just we wanted to look different from
Gather round.
But that it was a good cause. It was we're giving up our red this week because we need people to donate to blood drives. I like that. Good reason, although I still would have loved for the game to look differently. The traditional Collingwood versus Sydney look is one of the best out there, so unfortunately we didn't get that.
Also on that note, might have been Polly that mentioned this, but teams in specialty
Gather round.
jumpers did not go well. I believe teams that had specialty went 1-6. I think one of them was a clash that we just hadn't seen before.
And that one was the Suns.
Oh, spoiler alert. Interesting thing about this game, you had 2 players on Collingwood who had played exactly 1 AFL game each for the Sydney Swans. One of those was Darcy Cameron, who played well in his 100, and the other was Tim Membry.
This just felt like a game where Collingwood really controlled the flow. A lot of slow kick mark sequences. Didn't really let Sydney get out and run a ton, which, remember a week earlier, Alistair Clarkson talking about how good the Swans are at dominating the corridor, and yeah, Collingwood did a good job just not really allowing that and playing the game on their terms. Steele Sidebottom was probably the best midfielder in this game with help from Ned Long, who's just been a revelation, and it's been suggested, as Hawthorn continue to make moves for all these big names, there are guys down their list that are really good that would be in everyone else's 23. And this just kind of helps illustrate that point.
Who are those guys right now? Are you thinking about someone like Henry Hustwaite? Jai Sarong maybe is a name that's been thrown out.
Or like how tough it was for Harry Morrison to get into games until one all of a sudden towards the end of last year. And it's just a matter of clubs such as West Coast being able to identify that.
Early on in this Friday game, though, we saw the Swans' ability to convert from turnovers, and then that dried up pretty quickly in the second half. It was 17 at halftime, and even though it was only out to 25 at three-quarter time, you felt pretty secure about things, honestly, if you were a Collingwood fan. It was 7-4 in the third quarter, and I just didn't see a way back for Sydney outside of Isaac Heaney and Isaac Heaney.
I mean, Briley Bice was pretty good. Collingwood was able to get a couple of big turnovers off of him.
And they just kept being able to do a lot outside as well. That's why Sidebottom was so involved, because he's had that job on the wing. You have Perryman as a sweeper, setting up a lot of those as well. Perhaps his best game yet in Collingwood colors, though he's had a couple strong ones already. Defensively, you could highlight Darcy Moore with having probably his best game of the year, and part of that is because he was freed up by Premiership defender
Billy Frampton, who did a really nice job once again. 9 spoils and 8 intercepts.
I hate that it had to happen for Reece McInnes doing his ACL, but Frampton should have been ahead of him the whole time anyway.
Bobby Hill's best game of the year.
Dang it, Bobby.
3-1 from 12 disposals, also 2 assists. And then just a really quality up and down the lineup game. You could pick out a lot of different guys, whether that be Darcy Cameron. Although Rudy Grundy was solid, both rucks were decent in this game. Pat Lipinski, just pretty methodical, good performance for Collingwood.
The game plan was absolutely correct. Being able to spread the field, work outside, and try and force Sydney that way too. Forwards were able to get out the back of the Sydney defenders a lot, and it was so bad that they decided to move Tom McCartan forward. Well, granted, Joe Lamarty had done his hamstring by that point, but wasn't the fix that I expected, and still some issues with delivery. But the Swans' lack of depth at the source is really showing right now, because yes, they have a deep list, but the combination of Golden, McInerney, and Papley all being out just means you're missing some of your better players either immediately at the contest or right off it. Tom Hanley can play a Papley-like role in the forward 50, but not directly at stoppage, for example.
I like Hanley, but
I do as well.
definitely one of their bigger positives.
I saw him as maybe their second best.
I think that's where I had him as well. Something I noticed in this game, as much as I love Nick Blakey movement-wise, I don't think he's especially great in physical contests. And, targeting him for one-on-one forward entry seems to be the way to go.
Oh, and we got to mention Nick Dacos, because Nick Dacos, he could easily get the 3 in this game, because Nick Dacos,
he shook James Jordan's tag. I'm not going to be dismissive of how he performed. I thought he was pretty good. There were other guys who stood out to me more personally.
Yeah, 34, 9 clearances, and 9 tackles, but I would say Long and Sidebottom both had a much bigger hand in this result than Nick did. That's not a knock on Nick at all. So the Saturday games were interesting for me, because I was expecting to be on a flight even before the Blues and Eagles bounced. Boarding should have started pretty close to when the first ever AFL game in Lyndoch started. Instead, the delay allowed me to watch all of Carlton West Coast first half live, but that's only because I'm an Eagles member. Otherwise, I would have definitely watched the first 3 quarters of North and Gold Coast live.
North Melbourne 13-11-89, defeated by Gold Coast 21-15-141.
The mighty sun.
First AFL game at Barossa Park. I gotta say, biggest pro out of this thing, camera angles are so much better than they were at Mount Barker. This looked like a proper broadcast. It was not difficult to watch. I still don't love the Suns pink, but you could definitely tell the teams apart. It looked better than I expected it would. I think if they just had a better logo, I'd be all in on this. North got down by 25 in the second quarter, cut it to 6, actually took a 7-point lead in the third, and then completely ran out of gas, and the Suns got on top of them and outscored them the rest of the way, 73-14. But this is one of those games where the final score doesn't quite tell everything, because this was competitive until the start of the fourth. Matt Rowell kicking a goal right at the third quarter siren to put it up to a 19-point lead seemed very significant, and it just completely fell out of control from there. What impressed me about the Suns in this game was how many different contributors they had.
Well, I think a record 14 goal kickers is telling there, but this is something that I also noticed last week for them against the Crows. And a lot of that was the younger guys working into things more. I highlighted last week, bit part from Jake Rogers as the sub, stuff that Will Graham and Ethan Reed were doing, Jed Walter doing a lot physically. Less from Walter in this game, but everybody got in on it. Again, 21 goals from 14 different players. And I think the only 3-goal kicker for either team was Ben Long.
It's Ben.
I feel like I mention this every week, but Ben Long's evolution into being a
Goal-scoring half forward.
into just being like a good half forward has been really fun.
He always strikes me as someone who's older than he actually is just because we've seen this longer first act of his career. He's only 27, but I don't know. Maybe
It's also just like in the face and facial hair.
Yeah, the short hair with the beard is probably what does it. But this is an incredible second act for him, and I can't help but be happy for the Suns, even if there can be a talk of handouts. This was a team that finished in the bottom 6 last year, so some of their scheduling is appropriate in that sense. Yes, the early schedule means they were playing some subpar teams early, and Essendon would have been another one of those as well, but they're succeeding in different ways than they did last year as well, which,
I don't think they got like a super easy schedule in terms of the double up, so I'm not going to jump on this too much.
I mean, there is SOS potential with them having to face the Crows again, as well as, a double up in Expansion Cup and Q Clash.
Also, as good as they've been in Darwin, they're going to be tested there.
Dogs and Hawks, I think?
Yes. Speaking of, I loved seeing one of the first times I've actually seen like any sort of AFL NRL crossover. I guess we can make this.
Oh, we're doing it now? All right. This is the part where we talk about the NRL. But yeah, was the Eels and Raiders out at TIO Stadium? I didn't realize that the Eels have done this now for, I think, about a dozen years, and they got throttled.
Eels.
It just also goes to show you just the difference in size between a rugby field and a footy oval with just how far away the stands were. And that's going to be something that pops up again in 2026 when the NFL goes to the G.
But it was just that there were ads up at the stadium that said, the Suns are back in Darwin. Like, it was acknowledged. Normally, you never see any sort of crossover between the two, like, at all. So that was different. That was really my entire point out of all of this.
Yeah, it was 50-12 for the Raiders. So you can pretty much put a line through Parramatta off of that alone. So I don't think any team that's given up 50, at least in the NRL era, has won the flag. I also know that the Storm were beaten up on the Waz and then took their foot off the gas a bit in the second half.
Also, Newcastle scored 4 points.
Okay, that happens.
And I don't think conditions were bad.
To do that against the Tigers is another thing, too. I know the Tigers have had some bigger recruits in recent times, but I believe that was their second win on the year. They'd also beaten the
Eels.
That was the pod where we talk about the NRL.
So Matt Rowell was kind of the leader in most of the statistical categories you'd expect, but I don't think he overwhelmingly dominated this game. I thought it was just, again, Bailey Humphrey doing his part in the middle.
You did not see that coming at all.
No, he, in past weeks, I said he had played at times kind of like 2024 Isaac Rankin. You know what? I had said that about Darcy Jones, I think, as well. This week, he was more like this year's Isaac Rankin, which was just fine. Smaller midfielder, getting contested possessions. Sam Flanders with 2 more goals and 2 assists. Ben Ainsworth's just been on a nice run as of late. I don't know if he's quite like the bellwether for this team, the barometer, but he could be.
It was 5 assists for him last week, and this one, it was a goal from 22. So again, involvement in different ways from a whole variety of people. And speaking of involvement in different ways, Joel Jeffrey, does he just love playing at the small venues? Because I think it was at Ballarat that he had the goal over his head in 2022. And I believe he was one of the players that really turned up in Darwin as well when he got a chance to play back home.
There was a common theme throughout this round that we saw across multiple games where you would see like a defender start to kind of push forward as the game went on, start to get more intercepts, and then kind of impact the game offensively as well. And I've made the comparison that Jack Payne did it not just this round, but against Geelong a couple weeks ago, where it's like, sometimes when you're watching soccer from like a high angle and you see that back line start to push like incrementally more and more forward. We kind of got that.
Collingwood managed to do that a bit with half forwards playing higher also.
But yeah, Joel Jeffrey, I had questioned like, why are you moving him out of the forward line in the first place? Because he's got some wow finishing ability. But in this game, he still managed to kick a goal in a behind, 20 disposals, 13 marks, 690 meters gained, which sometimes is an empty stat. But I think in this game, it helps kind of explain how he sort of stretched the field and impacted the game overall. North just didn't give much of anything defensively. Who did I like for North? Let's see. Jack Darling.
Which is a weird one to hear. 2-1 from 16, 10 contested. It was a lot more than just the immediate goal scoring impact from him. Probably for the first time as a Kangaroo that we can really say that.
What I really saw was whenever Jared Witz came off, North was very quick to have Darling taking on Ethan Reed in the ruck contest, and he did a pretty good job of just exploiting that. Physically, he was impactful altogether, and despite being limited by just being slow, he was actually pretty decent. Luke Parker, I think, faded late, but overall a decent game, and Zach Fisher was all right, but score does not really paint a favorable picture of North in this game. I thought they played better than the score would indicate. Did they deserve to win or anything? No, but they weren't that bad.
Oh, and Jacob Constanti got the goal that he was looking for last week. Because the Swans had played the night before, he wasn't able to go and find Callum Mills and finish the job that he started. Unfortunately, I also expect North to lose next week, and I'm going to say that now as my transition because they'll be playing on Good Friday, and Carlton, well, I mean, they had it easy, but 17-19-21 defeating the West Coast Eagles 6-14-50 in the Spoon Bowl. The first of two games between bottom five teams on Saturday at the Adelaide Oval. I never doubted the result of this game, and it certainly didn't help that West Coast were woefully inaccurate. I mean, 6-14 there is pretty telling. Jake Waterman struggled to actually hit his shots in his first game back. Another game, though, where the Eagles kicked the opening goal from Oscar Allen and then shat the bed. Yes, pressure was better when the game was actually slowed down a bit off stoppage, but so often it ended up being a full field transition game. Carlton did it more through the quarter, West Coast on the outside, and it felt odd to me that the game was played at such a high pace despite 93-degree heat.
You could tell just off of people being in the shade how hot this was. This is one you could probably drag your heels through.
I definitely did that. I was not looking forward to watching the second half once I saw how the first half ended. I mean, yeah, it's cool that Corey Durden, the guy who'd been on the fringe for a while, got 4 goals, but my team gave up 4 goals to Corey Durden.
I had said something about the lack of contested possessions from the Eagles, and it was funny, and now I forget it.
Oh yeah, that was a record. 77 contested possessions for the game. That's the lowest contested possession tally on record. That might go back to the start of champion data. Because the game was open both ways, it wasn't quite like Plankton just getting run over by the citizens of Bikini Bottom celebrating at the end of the SpongeBob movie.
Look, it's the wizard who saved us.
Yeah, it was not that either. Maybe it was the SpongeBob reference. I'm going to remember at some point. And when I do, I'll write it down. Or if it happens in the middle of this episode, I will just shout it out, even though we're probably talking about something else by that point, because I don't think there's a ton to say about this game.
Let's see. Plus 59 contested possessions for the Blues, plus 22 clearances, including plus 12 center bounce. In terms of the Eagles that I liked in this game, Liam Ryan with 2 goals, the only multi-goal scorer for the Eagles. I want to see him more in the middle. And if Harley Reid can play, from the back of the center square, in addition to that, I wouldn't be opposed. Harley was liked by Champion Data in this game. Again, just been getting more of the ball, though in less desirable conditions. That meaning playing for the Eagles. Jack Graham and Liam Baker with a lot of pressure. Tom Gross. So glad he wasn't suspended because I was scared Michael Christian was going to do his worst after a head clash with Harry Mackay that left Mackay concussed on return. But I maintain that in 2 games, Tom Gross has done more Harley Reid things, with the exception of flipping people off, than Harley Reid has. A behind from 18, 4 marks, 2 clearances, and an assist. This was, I think, the Eagles' last draft pick, and I love the way he started.
I'm going to spend like the entire rest of this episode trying to remember what it was about the contested possessions. It wasn't, that there is no passion, although I'm sure you could include that too.
Too cheap.
God, it was like actually really funny. And I told you it the other day. And that's what's annoying is that neither of us can remember.
By the way, this is one of the games where we had the most initials in notes, even though only one McGovern played, Mitch, and got more of the ball and did well with it, setting up rebounds.
I think he got the 3 in the Golden Fist this week.
I would understand that. Actually had a late goal on a bomb from 55 on an overlap from 23. 7 marks for Mitch as well, and a team-high 7 rebound 50s. 95% kick efficiency as well. Only one Hewitt played, George, when I included those initials. Only one Hollins, Ollie, but you wanted me to include those initials because you always confuse the two.
Yes. Elijah's the one that was at Gold Coast, right?
Yeah, and I believe was an emergency for this game. What else? We had 2 Reeds, of course, and not 1, not 2, but 3 Williams, and Zach was easily the best of them. Congrats to Will White also on his first AFL goal. Gave off a couple chances before that, 2 assists for him.
That was one of the few things I saw. I did see towards the end of this game, like after the North game had ended, I was like half watching this live, and I did see the Will White goal.
But I think we've talked enough about this game.
Western Bulldogs 14-13-97 defeated by Brisbane 18-10-118. Best game of the season so far? I don't know if it is, but it's definitely in the conversation.
Best game that didn't have a last minute ending attached to it, and those sometimes aren't the best games as a whole either. Was it awesome? Yes. Should it have been at Adelaide Oval, especially for Brisbane's sake, because they still haven't played therein?
Gather round.
Believe it or not. Yes, and I feel like they have to now be there next year, especially with this being the end of the contract as of now for 2026. But did Norwood also add to the game's elite atmosphere? Absolutely.
Were they at Mount Barker each of the last 2 years, or were they at Norwood first year?
I believe
first year was Mount Barker. I think they were at Mount Barker both years.
Against North both times? No, I think last year was Norwood.
Last year was Norwood, you're right.
Yeah, because I had in my nose that they played at Norwood before. I have this whole matrix of last times teams have played in and won at certain venues, and I had noted the Lions had won at Norwood.
Oh, speaking of, that Suns win out at Barossa was the first Suns win in South Australia since their first win ever.
Which is at a stadium that no longer exists.
Put it in H.
Another Brisbane Lions second half comeback, this time from 39 down a couple minutes into the third.
Any more and they would have needed Joe Danaher. But actually, would they have needed Danaher when Logan Morris and Eric Hipwood combined for 9 goals straight?
Eric Hipwood had 1 touch in the first half and finished with 5 goals. He was kind of like the face of the comeback in a lot of respects, but I think you could kind of look at this and look at a couple of their other games like the Geelong comeback, and you could see some of the same contributors taking part. I highlighted Jack Payne. I think you saw him kind of press his way more and more up the ground as he kept taking intercepts and kept the heat on because he was pressing his way up the ground more. And I'm going to go back and rewatch this one to really decide on, votes for America's Brownlow and things like that. Because in part, you had just gotten home and we were kind of talking through the game.
Yeah, I'd gotten home a little ahead of halftime, and we were talking through a lot of the third quarter, and that was when Hipwood started getting into it. I remember there was a really good Rayner mark as well, though I think that was the fourth quarter. The Lions have another couple of those guys that I like who are able to play above their height. really well, and Cam Rayner's that, but also Kalachi, whose versatility and just status as another one of those Lions contributors leads him to being one of the more underrated players of the league still, despite his 4-goal grand final performance. He had one of the late goals from a really tight angle. Amazingly, the Lions have now won their last 8 games of which they've trailed at the half. Thank you for that, Swamp. And even though Levi Ashcroft was the Rising Star nominee last week, this was a better game from him, I think. 1-1 from 22 and 2 assists. And it wasn't just the volume, it was right place, right time. From it wasn't an informal watch. I'd say I watched this game with 80% formality, maybe 70 to 75%. Above business casual. Yeah. If I was just guessing, who gets the top coaches votes, I would end up going with him. Although Hugh McCluggage really good once again. He was also good in the first half when the Lions were getting knocked around. And while Lachie Neal was solid and ended up with nice numbers on paper, good work from stoppage, 11 clearances, McCluggage's run to start this season has been really impressive. He's never going to be the highest efficiency guy, but I really liked what he offered. Another 32 disposals, 6 clearances, 6 tackles, 2 assists, and nearly 500 meters. What year was it that he was considered a top Brownlow contender before the season? Was it 2022? Might have been 22 or 23. There were a couple of Instagram pages I had followed that were saying that. Maybe it was 22. It might have been a talking point right as we were starting this show. I just vividly remember that. Let's talk about what got the Bulldogs out to their lead, because I do think they still played pretty well in a lot of respects in this game. I know you're going to talk about Riley Sanders a bunch because you've highlighted him as maybe being their best over this, 3-week stretch? Yeah, he was really good, doing a lot by hand once again. Goal from 22 disposals. Aaron Naughton came out on fire. He and Sam Darcy were both cooled off in the second half, which is a credit to Brisbane's tall defenders. Harris Andrews once again got better and better as the game went on. And Jack Payne totally got into things at the second half. We'd said that his first was nothing to be really inspired by. Matt Kennedy started off on fire, cooled off some as the game went on, ended up with a whole bunch of turnovers. I never know how exactly they come up with this measure, but he was credited with 12 clangers. I don't know if credited's the right term because that kind of has a positive connotation. All I know is that who covers clangers? Amy. Amy does. Not a sponsor. We'd take you as a sponsor, though. We'd be lucky to be with Amy. Kennedy knew Selwood. And I'm only saying that because of the bandage on his head. Joel Selwood would have found a way to win that game. That's the difference. I think Kennedy did have a goal as the Dogs were trying to fight back and got a couple in a row to break that Lions run. Because it was, 8 in a row for Brisbane? But his second half was much worse than his first. Yeah, I believe he ended up below 50% efficiency for the game. 44.4. When Brisbane were able to complete their setup, that being, non-center bounce stoppages, they profited. Plus 12 on stoppage clearances, 31 to 19. That was where McCluggage, Neal, and Will Ashcroft came in and combined for 24 clearances between them. Bailey Williams, I thought, had a really sharp game. That went to waste. Riley West, I guess in hindsight, him only kicking 1-3 could be something you regret, but I thought he was really good. 24 disposals, 10 score involvements. And for the first half, it was it validated my belief that I've had for the last few years that when they're on, the Bulldogs are as good as it gets. Really up there with the Lions when they're on and maybe Port when they're on. West is one of those players that we also really like as a defensive forward. We haven't seen that as much this year. No Cody Waitman has been part of that, and no Latham Vandermeer in this game as well. Once Vandermeer gets back, maybe we can see West trying to run a bit more interference. I wanted to see that from him against Noah Answorth or Jasper Fletcher, because I don't think Fletcher's really had that sort of physical guy against him yet, though I do like where he's been played. Initially was cast a mid forward of center, now pretty solid halfback flank. And he's another one that's going to go under the radar because who did he come in alongside? Will Ashcroft. Yeah, that'll do it. Through that first half, it was a lot of oh my God, the Bulldogs are getting contributions from all these guys you wouldn't expect. It was not just West. It was Lachie McNeil. It was Lachie Bramble, who I had made the case for getting dropped in past weeks, and he actually looked really good in getting them out to this lead.
But then, yeah, Brisbane comes swinging back. There's just, you see both these teams when they get the momentum running and get rolling downhill, how dangerous they are. I would be really frustrated if I'm a Bulldogs fan. They're now 0-3 in.
Gather round.
And I think this is their third straight year starting 2-3. But like, there are, if they didn't have this past history, I would feel so positive about where they are. Even though they're at the same place they've been the last couple of years, it looks better. I don't know. Am I crazy for saying that? I would still be skeptical because of the history, learn from your mistakes.
Max Lawton actually posted this. The Bulldogs are 2-3 for the fourth straight year, with a painful close loss to a top 4 team in
Gather round.
for the third straight year, because they are destined by the football gods to have the same Sisyphean season again and again and again. The optimism probably comes from remembering who they are still missing in all of this.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing.
Code words there for Bontempelli and Treloar.
Mostly Bontempelli. At this point, yeah, we don't know if Cody Wakeman's ever going to get out there this season, which is a shame.
Yeah, another setback. But this game emphasized just the streaky nature of footy and also the ability of both the Dogs and Lions to seize momentum for at least 20-minute stretches, if not longer. Anytime, though, the Dogs have a huge run against them, your mind goes back to the 2021 Grand Final. And I'm going to mention that again before we break, just because I can't believe that the thing that turned that game was Caleb Daniel getting called for a dangerous tackle against Max Gawn. You would think that even though it was a free against the Bulldogs, that just that statement of physicality would have been a death knell for Melbourne. Instead, I believe the run from there was 100-7.
You know, Benjamin, 78% of our listeners are between 18 and 35 years old, so they probably want to start a podcast like we did. How did you know that number, Ethan? Thanks to the analytics we have for Spotify for Podcasters. Formerly known as Anchor, sorry Frio fans, Spotify for Podcasters has tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast from your phone or your computer, no fancy software needed. It's so easy you can edit it while drunk. And Spotify for Podcasters doesn't just allow you to upload to Spotify, you can also distribute your podcast on platforms like Apple, Stitcher, and more, just like we do. Best of all, it's completely free. Not only is it free, you can even make money from listener support or ad revenue. Hint, hint. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to podcasters.spotify.com to get started today.
Welcome back to episode 233 of Americans Watching the Footy. Don't forget, we're on Twitter at Americans Footy. I'm on Twitter at Castle Media.
I am on Twitter at BenjaminHK01, and that sleeping lump next to my brother is our executive producer. He's on Instagram at @catnameDGrian. We're also at Americans Footy on a few other platforms, YouTube and Instagram, the most important of them. Once I'm through with my program and actually into full-time teaching, weirdly, I think I'm going to have more time to do shorts and things like that and make the YouTube side more engaging, because this is a semester from hell.
Ooh, maybe we could do some reaction videos.
I was thinking of uploading the highlights with narration of our own awards that we have, behind of the week, assist of the week, things like that.
I just want to do really low quality reaction content.
Are we going Jason Derulo level?
He's banging those drums.
We're getting back into things with the Saturday night game, the second of that
Gather round.
sickos doubleheader, and doubleheader in the baseball day-night doubleheader sense. Because I split admission. These were ticketed separately, I do believe. Still in the 40s at both those, and over 45,000 saw Melbourne 8-9-57 in their Flameheads get defeated by Essendon 15-6-96 in their Red Clash. Red Clash, black sash.
I like it more than just a red sash.
I would have preferred just a full white from them, because every club should have a white jumper.
I like what this looked like, though. When you said Flamehead, now I'm thinking, what would be the footy equivalent of, Blasty?
Blasty, of course, being the Calgary Flames horsehead logo, which is on a current sweater of theirs because it was brought back in reverse retro. That goes up there with the mechanical horse from the Detroit Pistons teal era. I don't know what the equivalent would be.
So I had said before in this game, it was a really good thing that Dogs Lions was presented to a U.S. audience and not this one. And that really took no foresight. Do you ever watch the Treehouse of Horror where Flanders can see the future whenever he holds someone's hand?
And remind me why this would be important here.
It was called The Ned Zone in Treehouse of Horror 15. It was a parody of The Dead Zone. which is a Stephen King thing.
A film I have not seen.
But like he sees that the Rosie O'Donnell musical fails and goes out of business. And he's like,
Well, I didn't need any special power to know that was coming.
yeah,
It was pretty easy to see that this game would be the shits in comparison to the game that preceded it. Note that I said the shits plural because the prior game was just the ship.
yeah, we've had this discussion how the shit singular is good, but the shits plural is bad.
This game thinks it's the shit, bitch. It ain't even the fart. We wish Alex Trebek or Johnny Gilbert would have said that one.
It really annoys me that you can, on the AFL app, split up player stats into quarters, but not team stats. And I don't know why that is. Also, that there are some things that you can get on the AFL app, but not on the actual AFL website is just really silly. But I'd love to know the exact second quarter stats for this, because Melbourne had 2 scores out of the second quarter, but for the first half as a whole, 2 goals from 27 inside 50s.
Yikes.
They made things interesting in the third quarter. Kazi Pickett kind of fueled some stuff. He was pretty good. I liked Ed Langdon. Most people did. He was one of the few bright spots for the D's, but with the exception of them getting it down to a 10-point game a couple times in the third quarter, I think this one would be baby-making footy.
Would you put Carlin West Coast there as well?
No, I think that one you could have tuned out from earlier, although there was that sort of like intrigue of, shit, Carlton have a halftime lead. Could it somehow happen again? It would be really funny.
And then when the Eagles kicked 1-6 in the third, that kind of cooled off. Baby making footy, we explained this like a year or two ago. Can you explain it again, Ethan?
When a game's bad enough that you don't turn it off, but it becomes background noise. Where you keep it on just in case something happens. But yeah, it ends up being just kind of there in the background to provide a soundtrack. And then, Mrs. Krabappel and Principal Skinner make babies, and I saw one of the babies, and the baby looked at me.
2 goals from 27 inside 50s, which is not a bad rate of inside 50s, by the way.
27 inside 50s for the first half. That's fine. Melbourne actually had 51 inside 50s to Essendon's 43 for the game. And yet, it never felt like they were supposed to win this game. They look really bad. And I've been saying this for a while, but I think seeing it against an Essendon team that I don't think was anything special. I don't think, Essendon was not bad, but it wasn't like, oh, wow, lids off, here we go. They did get some good performances that I want to highlight. I still continue to hype up the emerging young midfield core for them, except in this game, it wasn't Sam Durham and Archie Perkins. It was Sam Durham and Archie Roberts.
Roberts showed what he can do on the wing in that win against Portland. We were asking for more of it and more of it. We are seeing some of it, but he also had 6 tackles in this game and an assist as well from 28. So he's playing laterally over the full length of the oval, which is really pleasing. So if you could figure out some sort of combination of how to split inside versus outside time for Roberts, Durham, and Martin, you can really have something. And Martin, of course, got a lot of the ball as well. A goal from 28 and 11 marks as well, an assist.
I don't think he was really all that great.
A lot of volume there. Zach Merritt's 37 felt important for the sake of the volume, actually. But maybe also some of the outside stuff can open up for the others when Will Setterfield looked like he clicked right away. Octopus in his first game of the year.
Let's talk about, the positives that I didn't expect.
Setterfield is probably chiefly among them.
Oh, yeah.
10 tackles, 29 pressure acts, as well as 3 assists from 21. He was mostly matched up against Clayton Oliver, and he won that.
Clayton Oliver continues to have volume and no substance to it. Sorry to say. Like, a couple weeks in a row, you really wouldn't have noticed that he got over 20 disposals. Sam Draper, 22 disposals, and I think just 1 turnover to go with 26 hitouts. Nick Bryan looks like that injury he suffered is a season-ending knee injury, so more ruck time for Draper, which I don't know if that's great for Essendon and the team, but it's great for Essendon the entertainment factor, and it's great for maybe getting Todd Goldstein in there.
It was indeed Bryan's ACL, and yeah, Goldstein does seem like the next one up. If you do want another ruck, it depends on just what they want the split for Draper to be.
I forget who it was that had a free kick. Someone for Melbourne had a free kick, and then Draper, they tried to handball instead of kick, and Draper just kind of like knocked it away. Like, no, that's not happening, and took it with him.
Was it like a Dikembe Mutombo type thing? Almost just like nothing more.
No, because it was also like at ground level. It something similar happened in the final game of the round, I think. Let's see, what else was good from Essendon? Andrew McGrath looks like his talents haven't been completely stolen by the Monstars. Dylan Shield had a huge first half. Not dead Ben Hobbs, 2-1 from 20 disposals.
Do we need to use the Undertaker bell for not dead Ben?
Maybe. Zach Reed, since which game was it where he was so bad?
Well, that would have been round 2 against Adelaide.
That makes sense. Anyway,
but Reed has played a lot better, I'd say, these past 2 weeks.
And you know what else is pretty good? How about Jai Menzie?
Wait, are Essendon fans going to believe you? This is Jai Menzie we're talking about.
4 goals, 15 disposals, 8 marks, 8 score involvements.
Easily his best game at AFL level. I'm not even sure if he'd scored 3 in a game before. Investigating, and survey says no, he had not.
Essendon had nearly 100 more possessions in this game, really controlled the uncontested play, and in a lot of respects, it felt like an effort thing. It's funny because on one hand, you see guys that look like visibly frustrated, like Petrarca a week earlier, gone, and then Cade Chandler this week just looked really sad in the locker room after. But you've also got a lot of guys that don't seem to be playing with a lot of intensity. Like, there's some good pieces here, and I still maintain that at some point this year, like, if they go full rebuild, it doesn't have to be a long rebuild. Like, they could be back to relevance and being competitive sooner than Richmond, probably.
Who would you label, though, as the best of that younger crop that we know is staying? Because Kazi Pickett might have been their best with his 2 goals and 4 clearances from 23.
Langford and Windsor. Windsor did not have a very good game. But I'm starting to doubt, like, I'm not doubting that this team will win a game. They'll win a few.
I'm only doubting West Coast in that regard.
But, like, will they have that where the hell did that come from game? Or, like, where has that been all along? Or will they only get wins in, like, very uninspiring mess situations?
I'd be more confident in them beating a finals team than North, weirdly, for some reason.
I'm not. I feel much more confident in North doing that.
I don't know why. I feel like we just haven't seen North play up to that level for 4 quarters yet. Their only win coming against the D's, I think, is what is holding me back right now, even though
Melbourne hasn't won a game yet.
Weirdly, yes, for some reason. I feel like there's going to be some game where Viney puts it together and Oliver isn't just volume.
Viney, I think at this point, just, the lack of efficiency. I know it's what he is, but it's not productive with where the rest of the team is. If the other guys are high efficiency and high volume, he can get away with it.
By the way,
This has always been his style, so I'm not going to, get on him for it as much as it's just within where the team is, it's not productive.
By the way, I'm not sure if he'd be a good fit at North if he does want to go there.
Actually, I think that could be a pretty good fit.
I'm not sure with Davies Uniacke not contributing much defensively as well, and Parker also already being present. I think about North just because that's where his dad's the GM. And oh yeah, LDU through 32 happened this week. So sorry, Saints, you could only get Tom DeKoning and Miles Bergman and Lecalier. Maybe.
This next one might be the game we talk about the least out of anything.
Richmond 7-5-47 defeated by Fremantle 16-12, 108. It was just 2 points at quarter time and 10 points at halftime.
Richmond actually had an 11-point lead at one point in the second quarter, and then after that, Freo outscored them 80-8.
Hey, at least it wasn't in a grand final.
Interesting fact, all 5 of Freo's games so far have been under the heat policy. Josh Tracy kicked 6 and did a really good job against Ben Miller, who's been really good in most defensive assignments. Andrew Brayshaw was solid. Nice to see Hayden Young back and immediately do his thing stretching the field. That was good.
I still feel bad about this game being one of the ones at the wall set, even though it had over 10,000 there, and that meant it was actually better attended than both of the Norwood games, just because it was Bolton's first against Richmond. That's the only reason, and Shea Bolton doing Shea Bolton things would still be fun, and I imagine when he eventually does play against Richmond and Victoria, he will get cheered.
I would have to think so.
You would think that would be the case for all the departures. Baker and Graham as well.
Yeah, he was solid.
He had one of his near marks of the year. And actually, you know what? It might be paid because he held on to it more than Josh Weddle held on to his mark. It was
He also got a free kick out of it.
Yeah, but sometimes it's like mark or free kick, take your pick. I think it was ruled a free.
Yeah. Now, this was not a mark. I mean, I would not have paid it.
We've also had some other pretty good marks in this round. Rayner took one.
Ollie Dempsey actually took one. Sam Draper over Max Gone. Maybe the most interesting thing to come out of this game actually was umpire Paul Rebashini colliding with Jaden Short. Totally inadvertent head clash. I think Rebashini actually ended up passing the head impact assessment, but his shoulder was messed up, was what they had said.
Yeah, could easily dislocate it on impact to the ground.
Just overall good to see Frio healthier, to the point that now Isaiah Dudley was coming in as the sub, and I like Isaiah Dudley. I guess the biggest thing out of this game is Patrick Voss is kind of becoming a meme.
He is the loves a goal player so far this year, especially with Papley being out with his cracked heel.
He's kind of a big goober and isn't always the most refined player, so I think people enjoy watching him.
And he celebrated his goal in the second half like it was to win the Champions League.
It was a little bit like Forrest Gump, except he ran in the opposite direction.
I was thinking more like that Geico commercial where I think, look at what it means to them actually comes from.
I mean, like, it was said long before that.
Yeah, but like, it was one where like the guy just like keeps sliding on his knees over the entire length of the field and something like that. It was that much of a caricature of a celebration.
Alex Pierce kicked his 6th career goal. That was cool.
Yeah. How many years is this in a row for him with a goal, by the way? At least 2. Because he kicked one last year in that Collingwood draw. Yeah, 3 goals in 4 years for him. He has kicked as many goals in the past 10 seasons as he did in his first. In fact, over a 4-game stretch in his first season.
I really don't have much else to give you here.
I just love seeing defenders get their rare goals. But this was kind of the game that you expected. Richmond can contend with a lot of teams for a half, and then at some point, it's going to break.
Maurice Rioli got off to a nice start in this game, so that was cool. He had 2 early goals and a 3rd score involvement, and then he kind of vanished. Picking a polished turd out of this game is going to be a challenge.
And we can't go with ham sandwich. Even though Sean Darcy was beaten in the ruck, good to see him back and get through a full game.
Yeah, that was more important, especially with a good challenge in Nankervis. Like, that was more important. Just, can he survive was more important than his actual performance. Oh, they talked about why Camden McIntosh has been wearing his headband.
And the reason is?
To keep sweat from taking all the sunscreen and making it run down his face.
Yeah, I figured it was something like that. I mean, players generate a lot of sweat, and there might be even more coming from his bald head.
All right.
It would be really cool if Camden McIntosh, or really any player, I think McIntosh would be perfect for it because he's got like no hair, just wrapped his head up as if he was getting like a Turkish hair transplant, but he didn't actually, and he just had his head wrapped.
That would be a great prank coming off the bye week.
It would be a great prank at any time.
Bye week, I think, is the right time for it, though. St. Kilda, 12-10-82 in their old school heritage jumper, defeated by GWS in their never surrender garb, 16-14-110. This could have been an elite clash had the Saints gone with candy stripes. It was still good, but not anywhere close to elite.
Jack Sinclair rocking the collar is very good, but yeah, my opinion on Saints gear, like the elite tier is the candy stripe, Stickman, Crusader. This is a step below that. It's better than like the 3-panel one they normally wear at home, though.
I mean, I would go Crusader as their full-time look, just black or red.
I would too. Toby Green kicked 5 in this one.
And totally took the game over in the 3rd quarter. We were talking at halftime, Ethan, and we were asking who is going to take over individually. I noted a lot of contest work from Josh Kelly, but not too efficient. It did feel like a game where Toby Green would get his opportunities because he was getting some good time in the center, had started there actually. And then in the 3rd, he kicked 3 goals straight from 8, 4 contested, 2 marks, 2 clearances, and gained 231 meters. And that was a really good night, even though it was 4 goals to none in the last. Other big positive, Harvey Thomas was in for Brent Daniels. Really good waiting kicks from half forward and got late reward with a goal too. Now remember, he hadn't been in for a combination of Nad Monday stuff and I think a bit of form right away. A goal from 13 and 3 assists for him. Again, a lot of those were just not super long kicks, but well-weighted kicks from half forward. Oh yeah, the comical side of not 15 continued. There was a Melbourne kick that went clear across all of the posts that was called not 15. And I just want Josh Garlop at the kick it forward guys now to do a sketch where the only kicks that are paid are ones that are exactly 15 meters.
I kind of like how you have to count to 3 before throwing the holy hand grenade. What if John Morant gets asked about a celebration and starts talking about the holy hand grenade?
We would be living in a very blessed timeline if so.
The overarching theme from this game was the difference in depth, I think, for GWS, because Jack McRae got tagged by Toby Bedford and struggled to make an impact on the game. And that's something that he never really had to deal with the Bulldogs because, Bont or Libba would be the ones getting tagged. And the Giants just did a really good job of limiting St. Kilda's main pieces, whether it be Cal Wilkie, Mitch Owens, really other than Nasiah Wanganeen-Miller, who was excellent.
And ended up with 3 goals, couple from overlaps and just bombs. His first ever multi-goal game.
And then the Saints were just not their most skilled. Darcy Wilson's really turnover prone. And outside of Mason Wood, Ryan Burns and Hugo Garcia were all right, but they were largely just, there was a gap in talent and a gap in number of top level players.
It's not just top level stuff. It's those players who were forced to do it by committee because they weren't at the top level or also beaten in their matchups. I noted not just Toby Bedford over Jack McRae. Harvey Thomas, in addition to his work with the ball, he was matched up against Jack Sinclair. Success. Sam Taylor gave Mitch Owens multiple baths. Owens was non-existent in the first 3 quarters. Connor Iden shut down Jack Higgins for the most part, and Toby Green over Jimmy Webster. That's something that you would expect to see, but just worth mentioning there because when Toby Green went out of the center, Webster was his matchup, and he won that.
Jimmy Webster had one where he was completely lost trying to mark against, I think it was Jake Riccardi at the end of the 3rd quarter. Yeah.
Yeah, well, one of the cases where that matchup had gotten switched. The other thing that was helping with the Giants was what Jesse Hogan was doing. He was trying to force switches between Cal Wilkie and Anthony Caminiti. And there was a question of whether or not what Hogan was doing was legal or whether he should have been called for some blocking freeze. But he was given passes by the umpires for the whole game. You want to also talk depth for the Giants? I want to make sure we mention Jacob Ware.
Yes. So I had really liked him in the first few weeks. And in this game, it was the combination of quality and volume that I think kind of put him on everyone's radar. Getting to that 20 disposal plateau gets people to take you more seriously.
A goal from 20, 478 meters gained. Very little in terms of contested work, but involved in a lot of the rebound play and setting up passages that went from defensive 50 toward the half-forward flank. It was him kind of being the second guy in that regard, playing a little bit further downfield compared to Lockie Ash, who was really taken over from his fellow Lockie in Whitfield as the main rebounder into very good effect. This is the second consecutive game where really Ash is getting unanimously good reviews.
Yeah, it's just a question of, how much do you value his role? Because it was largely uncontested versus, some of the other players that kind of made things happen. But I'm liking him in that spot more than I like Whitfield. I guess the other just main takeaway out of this game is Nasiah is going to get paid.
And I hoped that the Saints could have done it this week while he was in his home state to make a statement. No pun intended. But he will get paid. And I see some Dan Houston parallels right now, especially with just the potency in this game off the overlap more than in prior years.
Oh, I don't see a ton of parallels to Dan Houston. I see him as kind of his own thing, although he did have the multiple long goals. There was that.
That's why. And I think just the similarity that players need to be assigned to keep direct watch of him in a way that they have done with Houston in the past. I think about how that was maybe the most successful thing that Michael Voss did in a game plan last year.
But I always think of Houston as impacting things from kind of behind the play, whereas Nasiah is more directly in the middle, in the thick of it, if you will.
That's a North thing.
I'm surprised it's not a Hawthorne thing, and that's a convenient transition.
Is it, though? Because Hawthorne, they were not in the thick of it.
I mean, they were. Maybe not positively, but they were there. Port Adelaide, 18-13, 121, defeating Hawthorn 14-7-91. At one point, it was 79-8, and then Hawthorn got it all the way down to 22. Sam Powell-Pepper got a goal that kind of put things back in control. Willie Rioli then showed the ball to Jankwath Jath before kicking it clear out of the stadium, and Jath lost his shit, and so did the entire Hawthorn team, and it kind of fell apart from there.
But yeah, that was the double goal. It's funny because I think we had seen now Hawk Jack Ginnivan get double goals on at least one occasion. I think it was against Geelong. Was it? It might have been.
I don't think we gave Ginnivan a double goal. Maybe,
or maybe it was a free against someone else.
I feel like he might have done that against like Collingwood, actually.
I don't know. That would require really going back into the archives, but this was a satisfying conclusion with Port getting this win, particularly because it was over Hawthorn and with Port just needing this in every way possible. But at the same time, I have a feeling you're not too enthused about this going into Easter Monday.
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad that Hawthorn didn't get completely steamrolled towards the end, I think, because that could kind of convince them like, hey, we're all right. We're not as bad as we made things look.
But Sam Mitchell also isn't the type to make a bunch of huge changes right after one loss. And Brad Klebanski was saying the same thing.
No, and I like if you listen to him post-game, he made it pretty clear. He was like, all right, we're not as bad as we made this look. It's a loss and it's frustrating, but it's what it is. I think he handled things really well. And, it was just like, they got taught a lesson.
Difficult to navigate life without Will Day. And also, I would have said navigating life without Connor Nash, but
it sounds like that's pretty minor.
Not only that, but also Nash was out of it before Hawthorn made their push. My thought had always been, that trio, Day, Nash, and Newcomb.
If you listen post-game, Mitchell was saying, like, we were looking to get Bruce in somewhere and Nash could have played through it, but it seemed like the right opportunity. So I would be very surprised if Nash isn't playing Easter Monday. James Werfel did get a little banged up again towards the end of the game. That was significant, but I'm really impressed that with Werfel being in his first game back, Nash subbed out, who really took the game on second half to make the comeback happen. It was him, it was James Sicily, and it was Jack Gunston kicking 6. Woo! I give Gunston, I think, my nod for polished turd because he was the only one that showed up at the first half. But let's talk about how Port got up to begin with. They started Connor Rosie at halfback, and
been waiting for this. I have been waiting for this because they have enough things going on in the middle. And yes, I say that even though they were matching up against Hawthorn. The combination of Willem Drew and the Horny One.
Here he is again, the horny one.
Already does a lot there. You've had Butters back for 2 games now as well. Marias can even play in the middle a bit too, and I'm liking him more and more as he's getting steadier time. And I remember seeing these experiments with Rosie in the back before, just very briefly, like in injury situations, and wanting to see more of it. And his delivery was sharp. And he did still get his forward chances as well, kicking 2-1 from 28, but 8 intercepts is probably the biggest standout number there. And they were still +5 in clearances for the game and +10 from stoppage.
And that was with, the late run, which also, Hawthorn had the first 11 free kicks of the second half.
12, I think.
Yeah, 12. It was probably 8 or 9 of them were deserved, but they also let Hawthorn get away with committing like 3 or 4 of them. But yeah, Rosie, excellent. Actually, in really their last 2 losses, I had said that Port weren't getting the supporting contributions, and they did in this game between. I want to give a lot of credit to Lachie Jones as well. Like, Connor Rosie struggling this year had been well documented. Lachie Jones was like borderline Space Jam levels of struggling before this game.
We talked about him as a worst on-round candidate at least once before he actually got subbed out.
He was really good. I wouldn't put him, in the conversation to get any sort of votes out of this game, but he was really good.
15 disposals and 6 marks for Lachie Jones. Just not fucking up is sometimes enough.
Don't fuck it up.
And he didn't really fuck up.
He kind of controlled things from the back, had a couple key intercepts.
It's interesting, by the way, you're talking about Drew as this supporting figure, and I think that's the case now that Butters is back. We can really say that again. because he definitely wasn't a supporting figure at the start of the year. Butters, though, I'll mention with 4 assists and 8 clearances from his 33. Last week, he was feeling his way back into the game. He was in it the whole way this time.
Joe Richards' best game since joining them, and I thought it was really neat to see just like Collingwood fans speak very favorably of him, because normally, if someone leaves your team, people don't like that.
Especially after such a brief stint there, too.
Well, there seemed to be like a level of understanding, and that was cool.
I mean, especially with the expectation that Schultz would rise. I think Richards knew that it would be tough to get a spot. He had 2 goals from 16, but it wasn't just his goal scoring either.
The goal scoring was big early, though. He definitely helped set the tone in that regard.
But a couple sharp, kind of shorter handballs, just knowing when to give off was the big thing for him. We hadn't doubted the finishing ability. It was that extra level of really melding with the rest of that forward group.
Kane Farrell had a really interesting game. I had mentioned him. Bombed some long kicks forward that weren't always super accurate, but similar to Rowan Marshall against Port, actually. They would usually sit for someone who was able to get there first and play on from it. So it worked out. Also, I came up with another Sam Powell-Pepper thing.
You already talked about how he's
like Wario if Wario was in shape.
Yes, that's what it was. I mean, that's a title there for us.
Also, he's just like pure testosterone. That could be like a John Rothstein tweet, just like Sam Powell-Pepper.
Pure testosterone. I like it.
He had a couple early goals and was just really involved at the start. Watching this game from a pro-Port angle,
really anti-Hawthorn.
Yeah, that was fun. It's a lot more fun when Port's on your side than being against them, because they have some guys that can really get under your skin, like obviously Zach Butters,
Horn Francis, Drew,
kind of the entire team if we're going to be real. And it's way more fun when A, you're pulling for them, and B, they're actually getting it done, because a lot of times, it's like, I think we've all had an experience at some point where we've wanted them to win for one reason or another, and they've disappointed.
As for Hawthorn this game, we talked about the best performers for them. We talked about Dunstan's 6. Sicily's move forward in the second half ended up working. Got 2 goals out of that, and mostly, I believe, occupied Miles Bergman to good effect, where Bergman had a really positive start to the game. But it was easily the quietest game of the year from the Mosquito fleet. Yeah, I guess Dylan Moore is roped in there, but I'm mostly thinking of the Ginnivan-Watson duo, held to a total of 14 disposals and no scores whatsoever.
When you put him next to Nick Watson, Jack Ginnivan looks tall.
What's the height difference there? Jack Ginnivan is 6'1".
I would put him on the list of guys you didn't realize are so tall. It's really him and Callum Brown.
Who is a forward. He's one of those guys I talk about guys who play taller than their height. Jack Ginnivan plays shorter than his height.
He's had a relatively quiet year so far,
which means there's a time for him to break out, and now you're scared that it's Easter Monday.
There are enough other things about that team that worry me. Let's see what else. Carl Amon was largely quiet in this game. He ended up with 21 disposals, but wasn't super impactful. That's definitely notable. Finn McGuinness was ranked really poorly by Champion Data and was just bad.
He was the one that I thought would be the next one out of the team now that he's no longer a tagger, and I hold my belief.
If there's anyone to get dropped out of this game, I think it would be him. So while we were recording this episode, some things transpired that we feel like we need to discuss. First off, Patrick Voss is facing a 3-game suspension for basically just inadvertently punching Nick Glostone in the face. And I actually think this is good, because it means we're actually punishing the action instead of the outcome.
The question is this different from the Rory Lobb case?
Not by much, is the funny thing.
So are we saying Voss should get off because of that precedent, or Lobb should have gotten 3 games?
Maybe the answer to both is somewhere between them. I don't know, maybe Lobb should have had 1 and Voss should have had 2. I don't know. Also, we have even more spicy fallout from Willie Rioli last night.
This is more than spice, I think. I mean, this is generations worth, honestly, of pure capsaicin. I mean, we saw him showing the ball to CJ, obviously. It started with that, but then he posted on Instagram about how, because of happenings with his family, his father, Willie Sr., as well as Cyril, that he has a genuine hatred for the Hawthorn Football Club.
So, a few years ago, Hawthorne, similar to Collingwood, was getting investigated.
Wasn't that just last year, Ethan?
Maybe it was.
It was last year, amazingly. I mean, that's part of why things were so emotional for Chris Fagan.
So my assumption with things like this that are mostly based on hearsay is always the real truth is somewhere in the middle. And the question is how far in the middle between the testimonies from, people at Hawthorne and from the players, etc. And while this is obviously like a traumatic and bad thing, I do like, despite the circumstances, we actually have a case where a player hates an opposing team and not because of like players that are on it, hates like the uniform itself and the club itself. And, people have talked about how like, maybe the Collingwood Carlton rivalry has lost some of its bite. You don't have like those like dividing lines between the two clubs anymore on like social and economic divides and racial divides and stuff. And obviously like mistreatment of Indigenous players is bad. So while it's from a place of hurt and probably some really reprehensible things happened, I want more players to like hate a team just regardless of who's playing for them. Like that's how fans feel. It's cool if players feel that way, and it would just be better if it was because, I always hated this team growing up, not because of like racism.
We will note that Willie did delete the post not all that long after he put it out, maybe like an hour or so, but that's not going to go away. Play with fire, you're going to get burned. My hatred for this club goes way past last year's antics. What they did to my dad and my brother is why I can't stand them, not the players.
It's like, I think it was great that Ken Griffey Jr. always hated the Yankees and promised he'd never play for them.
And that stemmed from him and his dad being mistreated by, I believe, George Steinbrenner himself regarding some of the rules limiting players' kids' involvement in the clubhouse.
And that, you see, was like not a racial thing. That was just a thing. And I'd rather it be because of that. But again, I would love for more rivalries to be, no matter who is on this team, I will hate them. And that's tough. That doesn't always happen because look, how many of these guys know each other, grew up together? So I'd rather this happen for less terrible reasons.
But it's out there and rivalries are good.
Coaches' votes are out. Hugh McCluggage is now the leader. I'm just happy Tom Atkins got a perfect 10. I'm a little surprised that Connor Rosie and Zach Butters only combined for 17 instead of 18. So someone didn't make them their top two. Someone made one of them third place.
We've yet to get perfect alignment this year.
I don't think we did at all last year either. In fact, I'm certain we didn't because I would have remembered if we did.
Actually, I really liked the Brisbane and Bulldogs one. Let's talk about that for a second. Hugh McCluggage got 9 along with Eric Hipwood. So the coaches agreed on the top two, but not the order, and nothing else. 9-9, 3-3, 2-2, 1-1.
And I'm surprised with the nature of that game that only one vote total went to a Bulldog, that being Ed Richards getting a 5th place vote. I'm glad Jack Payne got one. So with that, we turn our attention to awards. So we've got a couple of our own awards, a couple of league-wide awards. Let's start off with Mark of the Week, yeah?
Yeah, we check the league's nominees first. Christian Salem took the Mark of the Week for round 4, surprisingly enough. We preferred Tom DeKoning's take over Brody Myacek, but Christian Salem, it was more for the flip over Patrick Dangerfield afterward.
We have a better crop this week.
And it began on Thursday with Ollie Dempsey marking a Tom Atkins kick at the goal square over Mark Keane's shoulder. Then Saturday, you had Sam Draper getting into Max Gaun's back to take a Jackson Pryor kick on the wing. Didn't get all the way up.
Because look at the size of the guy he was against.
All right, Liam Ryan did it.
True. There's also less of Liam Ryan to move than there is of Sam Draper.
And Jesse Hogan on Sunday took a Toby Benford kick over Callum Brown in the pack, and Callum Brown was a forward, but not my winner.
I'm going to lean Ollie Dempsey. It was also at a pretty important moment in the game, but they were all solid. I think I'll rank them Dempsey 1, Hogan 2, Draper 3, but have no objection to any of them winning.
I'm in agreement on the rankings. I think Dempsey's a pretty clear winner for me.
If it wasn't Dempsey, I would have been more impressed in the moment because, Dempsey nearly does this every week, and this time he got one. Still, some of the ones he's nearly had have been way more impressive. Goal of the week for round 4 was Will Ashcroft. He picked on 2 bounces from the right pocket after taking a Dane Zorko handball. Your round 5 nominees, we've got Zach Bailey receiving a Kalachi handball, pivoting around Bailey Dale and kicking a grounder from a tight angle.
That was a really, really untidy passage, but it resulted in a goal.
We've got Steely Green picking up a Tim Taranto kick off the pack and scoring while running towards the boundary. It was really the momentum carrying him and kicking sort of in spite of that made that one cool. Then we've got Patrick Voss picking up a ground ball, escaping a Nick Vlostone tackle and snapping with his right. My guess is that Voss will win because of his newfound cult hero-ness. But I'm going to go with Zach Bailey. Benjamin, what do you like?
Voss was most impressive in the lead up. Bailey had the tightest angle. Green probably had the best kick. I actually gave my vote to Steely Green, but wouldn't mind Bailey winning. And I expect it to be Voss because he's got that sort of Papley-esque status now.
I don't think any of these make it to Brownlow night, but they're solid.
No, I mean, we've also got Will Ashcroft's goal from last week that may very well be the leader in the clubhouse.
I'll still take Brian's.
I forgot about that one. Don't know how.
Behind of the week, last week we had Mac Andrew from the center square and hitting the left post about 3/4 of the way up. This week, we've got 2 nominees. The runner-up, I've got Jake Riccardi bouncing a dribbler from the left pocket across the face. And the winner has to be Daniel Rioli. He had a dribbler from the right pocket that ended up right. And I knew in the moment, because that gave me exactly what I want the behind of the week to give, the feeling of, oh, that would have been so cool if it was a goal.
Riccardi's gave me that too because it was some check side action in there, but I'll narrowly give it to Dan on that one.
I saw both live, and in the moment, I definitely got a better reaction out of Rioli's.
Definite downgrade in assist of the week. That was Will Ashcroft for round 4.
I would think that's the best assist we've had so far this year, yeah.
Clear leader of the clubhouse for me. It was off his own smother of a Luke Trader kick, and then Jackie Chan did, or Will Ashcroft did it, to Zach Bailey for the setup. This week, we went with Lockie McNeil, a handball out of Dane Zorko's tackle for Josh Dolan's first career goal. We've seen a couple of these tight window handballs through tackles get our nods now. Zach Jones had one a couple rounds prior.
This one's fun. Worst on round. So if you're new here, we give the worst on round award to player that was not either a late inclusion or subbed in or subbed out, player that played the full game and was supposed to play the full game. That was just worst. And our round 4 winner was Tom Cole. And I've got 5 nominees this week, including for the first time a couple of players in wins. So kind of a reverse polished turd. But I'm going to let Benjamin decide. We've got Jai Amos for basically doing nothing and missing the only shot he took. Charlie Cameron kicking 0-3 and having a couple of turnovers, but he did make up for it with 7 tackles. Finn McGinnis had just an overall stinker of a game. So did Nick Watson. And so did Jimmy Webster, who was just not only getting outmarked, but out of position on so many of those. Could not keep up. The couple of times I included him in notes from this game was Darcy Jones slipping past him, and then Jake Riccardi marking with Webster drifting out of position and struggling to make it back up. We've got a good mix of players from different position groups this week. Benjamin, give us a call.
Webster was the one that was also tasked with Toby Green, and Captain Toby went off the chain in the 3rd, so that's another thing to factor into that. But yeah, Riccardi showed him up, Darcy Jones in his helmet showed him up. I find it hard to give Cameron any worst on round consideration when his pressure did factor into things.
Just like how a decent 4th quarter kind of saved Mitch Owens from this list.
Owens was definitely saved by that. Watson is going to get a lot of attention for his quiet day, but McGinnis was more turnover prone and was actually the lowest rated player in that game by champion data. So he did get a bit more of the ball. Webster is the one that keeps sticking out to me, was the lowest rated player in the second Norwood game, even though it only has him losing 1 of 3 contested defensive one-on-ones.
It's more just there were some that he didn't contest.
Yeah, it just couldn't run with him, kept getting clowned.
So after playing really well a couple weeks ago, Jimmy Webster, you were not good this week. Remember a Zach Reed show just a couple weeks ago? There was opportunity for redemption. But are we giving it to Jimmy Webster?
I would. So congratulations to the Giants, because you have caused both of the last 2 worst on-round performers. Looking at you next, Pros. Main character, last round, it was the Gold Coast versus Adelaide umpires with several missed calls that may have had a hand in the Gold Coast win, because we still feel like the right team won that game. And you can go back and listen to our round 4 recap for our thoughts there. This week, I think the aftermath on Monday made it even more obvious that it's Willie Rioli who's our main.
Oh yeah, while we were recording this, the really exciting finish to the Masters was going on. I don't know if any of Benjamin's reactions made it in. First off, I think some of the so-called traditions of the Masters are dumb and crusty and need to be fixed. Like, don't just call them patrons, you can call them fans. Let people bring in phones so they can take photos and stuff. Keep the concession prices though, that's good. But this was as someone who's not that into golf and doesn't have a real attachment to any particular golfer, this was tremendous theater. There were ups and downs. And the pacing felt really good, where it never felt like there was a long lull. There was always something happening, and that might have just been the timing of the groups and who ended up competing. Also, did you see the photo Geelong posted in relation to it?
With all the players watching on somebody's phone, maybe Jeremy Cameron's, as Rory McIlroy finally completed his career Grand Slam?
Yes. 2 things about this. One, it's perfect that Jeremy Cameron and Brad Close were in that. They had to be. Second, how were they only watching on somebody's phone instead of a large TV? Didn't whatever you have to do with training wait just a few minutes for that? Watching on somebody's phone instead of the TV was even funnier than Max Holmes' shoes. Were Birkenstock sandals or something with socks?
With Adidas socks, no less.
Oh, and Tom Stewart's there, which means maybe he's not shitting his brains out anymore. I just want to mention again, whoever came up with calling it
Gather round.
must have felt like a genius when they did that, because it's the perfect pun. It's correct, and it sounds kind of cool. It's got to be the feeling that DJ Khaled and T-Pain got. And T-Pain said, we're going to win no matter what. And DJ Khaled said, that's it. They're going to play that at the Super Bowl. And he was right.
I've got a plane to catch. I am at BenjaminHK01 on Twitter.
I am at Castle Media. Brian Harambe is, I think, just chilling under my bed right now. He is on Instagram at cat named Brian.
Collectively, we are at Americans Footy on various forms of social media. I will talk to y'all again once I am back in San Diego. Good time of day.